The old world convinced you that fuel was everywhere, permanent, and obedient. People believed that even after collapse, they could still crack open a tank, tilt a can, or drain a generator, and walk away with enough combustion to keep moving. That belief is a confident mistake. In a resource-dead apocalypse, fuel is not a supply. It is an adversary. Every drop that remains is unstable, stratified, or chemically hostile. Every tank is a pressure trap. Every vapor pocket is a blind ignition zone. Survivors don't die because fuel is gone. They die because they assume it behaves the way it used to. It doesn't. The world changed, and combustion became a battlefield metric, not a convenience. You live in an era where heat, mobility, and purification hinge on your ability to extract, reclaim, or convert whatever hydrocarbons still haunt the ruins. Fire is no longer a tool. It is a threshold between existing and erasing. And yet, the world hides more usable fuel than the untrained eye can see. Locked inside dead engines, ghosting through vapor cavities, trapped in degraded oils, or dormant inside biomass. But no amount of luck uncovers it. Only tools that impose discipline on chaos can transform decay into energy. That is why these 7 instruments matter. They are not crafted for comfort, but engineered for survival math. Each one dismantles a fatal assumption and replaces it with an operational principle: pressure before suction, stability before combustion, filtration before use, conversion before desperation, analysis before ignition. When the world offers nothing but ruin, these tools don't give you power. They allow you to take it back. Your survival begins where the old world's illusions end. And this is where that line is drawn. You approach a dead vehicle the way a tactician approaches a booby-trapped corridor, assuming every angle is wrong until proven otherwise. Most survivors see a fuel tank and think liquid resource. A strategist sees pressure decay, vapor stratification, rust particulates, water intrusion, microbial bloom, and a kill zone radius defined by one static spark. This is why the siphon master line is not a convenience, but a doctrine. It is the only extraction instrument engineered for a world where tanks have aged into unpredictable chemical chambers. Those who rely on improvised hoses reenact an outdated world. Those who survive use the master line. The first principle is atmospheric discipline. Every tank in the collapse behaves like a sealed lung. Temperature swings create internal vacuum pockets. Corrosion releases vapor phase toxins. Fuel decomposition expels flammable off gases that settle at the opening point. If you break that seal recklessly, you don't drain a tank. You ignite the surrounding air. The master line counters this by creating a stabilizing airway pull before the liquid contact phase. Its narrow-gauge architecture equalizes pressure without oxygen flooding the chamber, preventing the sudden vapor burst that kills amateurs in abandoned garages and tight alleys. Then comes stratification. Post-collapse fuel separates into layers with lethal precision. The top layer carries volatile vapors and microdroplets of oxidized compounds. The mid-layer holds whatever usable hydrocarbon remains. The bottom layer is sludge, polymerized residues, fungal growth, metallic flakes, and water sinks. Anyone who siphons from the bottom destroys filters, clogs injectors, and wrecks generator pistons. The master line's articulated spine lets you navigate the tank interior like a probe, targeting the mid-column where combustion is still chemically coherent. You don't extract volume, you extract viability. Flow control is not optional. Most survivors still think suction is a physical act of drawing liquid. In a collapsed world, suction is contamination, inhalation, and neurological damage. You never place your mouth near a fuel line. You never rely on lung pressure. The master line's bite valve and non-static flow chamber allow controlled pull without human contact. Every centimeter of its sheath is designed to prevent static discharge because friction inside a cheap plastic tube becomes an ignition risk when vapor density surpasses collapse thresholds. The ones who ignore this reality don't get a second attempt. Distance becomes the third survival law. You never lean over a tank opening. You maintain a minimum two-step standoff angle, with the line extended and the receptacle grounded. The master line gives you the distance that separates extraction from cremation. Its insulated grips and dampening sleeve neutralize accidental grounding arcs that can jump from metal to skin in dry environments. Every feature exists because someone died learning why it was necessary. Finally, the operational protocol. You survey the tank for deformation, temperature variance, and corrosion fractures. You open slowly, never fully, and let the master line breathe the tank before it touches liquid. You insert without scraping. You angle for the mid-layer and pull only until clarity dips. The moment the fuel shifts color or opacity, you terminate extraction. Precision, not greed, sustains engines, heaters, and burners. The master line makes that precision enforceable. Its value is not in what it extracts, but in what it prevents you from taking. In the apocalypse, any fool can find fuel. Only the disciplined can take it without dying. And the siphon master line is the line between the two. Fuel stops being a liquid the moment it enters a collapsed environment. It becomes a vapor threat, an invisible shifting atmosphere that turns garages, tunnels, basements, and vehicle husks into confined explosive chambers. Most survivors treat fuel transfer as a mechanical action. Move liquid from point A to point B. But in a resource-dead apocalypse, the liquid isn't what kills you. The air does. Every space that once stored fuel is now saturated with volatile residues, aerosolized hydrocarbons, and static-charged microclimates. One spark, one unseen discharge, can erase you before you even realize your mistake. This is why the sparkless pump rig is not just equipment, it is a survival verdict. The failure point begins with electricity. Pre-collapse pumps run on motors whose brushes and coils generate microsparks with every rotation. In an intact world, those sparks are irrelevant. In a vapor-dense ruin, they are lethal. Survivors who repurpose electric pumps from abandoned workshops vanish in an instant flash. The air ignites before the liquid even moves. The sparkless pump rig eliminates this risk by stripping electricity out of the equation entirely. It relies on diaphragm compression, manual or foot-driven, with isolated chambers that never permit spark generation or heat friction. Every cycle of movement is grounded, shielded, and neutral. But spark elimination is only the first layer of survival logic. Vapor pockets behave like ambush predators. They accumulate in low spaces, cling to corners, or drift toward the slightest temperature gradient. When a survivor begins moving fuel without pre-clearing a vapor map, they stir layers of air and liquid that create instant ignition zones. The sparkless pump rig is engineered to produce negative turbulence. Its diaphragm system moves fuel without agitating the surrounding atmosphere. No churning, no aeration, no vapor disturbance. The environment stays calm, and calm is life. Flow control becomes the next battlefield. Collapse-era fuels are thickened, water split, or partially decomposed. A standard suction pump pulls unevenly, creating pulses that destabilize vapor stratification and stress weak containment walls. The sparkless pump rig delivers steady displacement, which means no surges, no backflow, and no pressure spikes. Its check valves are shielded against micro-arcing, and its outlet line is anti-static even under abrasive contact. When you pump degraded fuel, you are not merely transferring an asset. You are managing a hazard that wants to ignite itself. Then comes stealth. Every operation in a post-collapse landscape is a signal. The clatter of a mechanical pump echoes through ruined structures and draws scavengers, ferals, and human predators. The sparkless pump rig is nearly silent. You can drain a tank in an underground parking structure without announcing your presence to anyone except the shadows watching from the dark. Silence is not convenience. Silence is tactical invisibility. Operational protocol is absolute. You enter the zone slowly, letting humidity, temperature, and airflow reveal vapor concentrations. You secure the rig's grounding strap because neutralizing your body's static charge is as important as eliminating sparks from the tool itself. You pump from a distance, never positioning your body along the fuel line's axis. You monitor the clarity and temperature of the extracted fuel. Any shift means destabilization, and destabilization means withdrawal. Survivors who overstay the extraction window die in the collapse of their own assumptions. Electric pumps belong to the world that fell. The sparkless pump rig belongs to the world that replaced it. This tool doesn't just move fuel, it preserves the air you breathe, the body you inhabit, and the life you intend to keep. In the collapse, the greatest deception is the illusion that finding fuel is the hard part. It isn't. The vehicles, generators, tractors, storage drums, abandoned workshops, and industrial ruins scattered across the dead world still hold liquid. But almost none of it is alive. What you collect is not fuel, it is the corpse of fuel. And every survivor who treats that corpse as functional commits mechanical suicide. Engines seize, burners clog, pistons detonate, valves carbonize, generators choke on water-laced vapor. The untrained think they are scavenging fuel. In truth, they are harvesting chemical decay. That is why the degraded fuel reclaimer is not a luxury. It is the only barrier standing between functional power and catastrophic failure. Fuel death happens in stages. First, oxygen intrusion turns light fractions volatile and dark fractions gummy. Then, water migrates into tanks through condensation cycles, settling into a cold layer beneath the fuel. Microbial colonies bloom at the boundary between the water and hydrocarbon phases, converting fuel into acidic sludge that chews through metal linings and corrodes injectors. Add years of thermal expansion, polymer breakdown, rust flakes, and particulate sediment, and the liquid you siphon is a chemical minefield. You cannot burn this directly. You cannot store it safely. You cannot trust it. The reclaimer exists to reverse that death, slowly, methodically, ruthlessly. The first operation is sedimentation. Survivors who bypass this step poison every device they touch. You let the collected fuel settle in a sealed, temperature-stable vessel. Over hours or days, gravity forces heavy particulates, water beads, microbial mats, and metallic fragments downward. A clear dividing line emerges. The reclaimer's siphon wand allows you to pull from that upper clarified layer with surgical control, never disturbing the graveyard of contaminants below. The quality of your extraction determines the lifespan of your machines. Then comes filtration. Old world filters were designed for clean supply chains and controlled conditions. They fail in collapse environments. The reclaimer's multi-stage matrix, coarse mesh, fiber barrier, activated media, and microfine polish rebuilds fuel purity step by step. Coarse mesh removes rust and grit. The fiber barrier captures polymer strings, fungal threads, and coagulated fragments. Activated media strips dissolved contaminants and stabilizes the fuel's molecular profile. Microfine polish sieves out the invisible killers, microparticles that carve injector heads and score piston walls. Every stage is non-negotiable because every stage protects a piece of the machines you rely on. But filtration alone cannot resurrect dead fuel. Chemical stabilization is the next frontier. Degraded hydrocarbons lose volatility, absorb water, and oxidize into varnish-like residues that choke combustion systems. The reclaimer introduces stabilizing agents, oxygen inhibitors, phase separators, and hydrocarbon conditioners into the flow chamber. It breaks water clusters into extractable droplets. It suppresses further oxidation. It restores ignition profiles close to functional norms. You are not purifying fuel. You are resurrecting its ability to burn without destroying everything it touches. Thermal discipline matters too. Many survivors use open flame or uncontrolled heat to thin old fuel. This is an invitation to detonation. The reclaimer's sealed thermal bath allows controlled warming that reduces viscosity without volatilizing light fractions or creating explosive vapor pockets. Its thermal curve is engineered to stay below flashpoint thresholds, giving you fluidity without suicidal risk. Finally, the operational principle: you never store reclaimed fuel in contaminated vessels. You ground the container, purge oxygen, and seal it against humidity. You label every batch with extraction date, stabilization cycle, and source profile. In the apocalypse, inventory discipline is survival math. Misidentifying one container is enough to destroy your only generator or immobilize your only vehicle. The degraded fuel reclaimer is not a tool. It is a resurrection chamber. Without it, every fuel source in the wasteland turns against you. With it, dead hydrocarbons become power again. And power is the one currency the apocalypse still respects. In the late stages of collapse, the world reveals a final truth. Liquid fuel is not running out. It is transforming. What once powered engines now lingers as sludge in workshops, congealed oils in abandoned kitchens, rancid fats in animal remains, polymer-thick lubricants inside dead machinery, and blackened residues coating industrial basins. The amateurs walk past these deposits believing they are useless. The trained understand that energy never disappears. It only waits for the right extraction protocol. The thermal distillation forge is the instrument that turns that truth into power. To the unprepared, waste oils look inert, heavy, and dead. But chemically, they are rich in long-chain hydrocarbons, molecules that burn with extraordinary stability once liberated from their contaminants. The problem is that collapse has corrupted them. Water saturation, food particulates, fungal colonies, metallic grit, and the slow rot of time have turned them thick and hostile. You cannot filter this. You cannot burn it raw. What you must do is break it apart and rebuild it. Distillation is not a convenience. It is a controlled reforging of fuel itself. The forge begins with phase isolation. You heat the sludge in a sealed, oxygen-starved chamber where the temperature curve rises slowly, never crossing flashpoint thresholds. Anything above that is suicide. As the slurry warms, its components respond differently. Water boils off first as a hiss of steam that vents safely through the condensation stack. Only when the forge reaches mid-level heat do the long-chain hydrocarbons vaporize. They lift away from the heavy sediments, rising as a clean vapor phase that holds the usable heart of the fuel you're creating. The bottom sludge, the tar, the bone dust, the carbonized filth remains behind. You never disturb it. The vapor ascends into the condenser coil, where controlled cooling forces it to collapse back into liquid. This condensate becomes a usable burner-grade fuel, thinner than the original sludge, richer than scavenged gasoline, and far more stable under collapse conditions. But temperature discipline is everything. Too cold, and you produce weak condensate that separates on storage. Too hot, and you drag volatile impurities into the output stream, poisoning the batch. The forge makes the temperature curve predictable, repeatable, and safe. Once the condensate collects, the second operation begins: refinement. Even distilled fuel carries microimpurities, microparticles, light acids, and remnants of decomposition. A post-distillation pass through the forge's stabilizing chamber neutralizes acidic residues and aligns the hydrocarbon profile toward consistent combustion. What emerges is not synthetic diesel, not lamp oil, not kerosene, but a hybrid burn-grade fuel compatible with burners, stoves, heaters, and crude combustion chambers. In a world where engines fail and improvised flame keeps you alive, this is sovereignty. The forge also conquers one of the apocalypse's most overlooked energy reserves: animal fats. Every large carcass, game, livestock, or scavenged remains, carries lipids that can be rendered, heated, vaporized, and distilled into functional fuel. Civilization used to call this biofuel. In the collapse, you call it survival. Nothing organic goes to waste. Everything that lived becomes a potential flame. But the true strength of the thermal distillation forge lies in its operational principle. Conversion eliminates scarcity. When fuel reservoirs dry up, when scavengers strip every vehicle tank to the bone, when even spoiled gasoline becomes rare, you still hold a path to power. Trash oils, rancid fats, industrial residues, they all bow to heat, pressure, and discipline. This is the tool of the survivor who refuses to accept the world's decay. The forge does not find fuel. It manufactures it out of ruin. And in a dead world, creation is the most powerful act left. Long after liquid hydrocarbons vanish from the obvious places, after tanks run dry, after engines are stripped, after every storage drum is siphoned to its last corrupted drop, survivors make a fatal assumption that the world has no fuel left. They walk through derelict factories, collapsed refineries, abandoned shipping yards, and decomposing vehicles without realizing they are surrounded by the last invisible reservoir of energy in the post-collapse landscape. Hydrocarbons do not merely sit as liquids. They evaporate, cling, and hide in vapor phase pockets that drift through dead infrastructure like ghosts. The amateurs breathe it in without understanding it. The disciplined harvest it. And the tool that makes this possible is the vapor harvest net. Most survivors look for fuel where it was stored. The strategist looks for fuel where it escaped. Over years of neglect, tanks develop microfractures that release vapor. Pipelines sweat hydrocarbons into hollow cavities. Storage facilities leak through corroded seams. Industrial chambers retain a thin atmospheric layer of evaporated fuel long after the liquid phase has vanished. Even the interior of long-idled engines carries a trapped microclimate of combustible vapor. The vapor harvest net turns these invisible remnants into operational resource, quietly, safely, and with precision. The science behind it is simple but uncompromising. Adsorption. Hydrocarbon vapors bind to certain materials the way dust clings to static surfaces, but collapse-grade vapors are diluted, contaminated, and inconsistent. The net uses a layered matrix designed to pull these scattered molecules out of the air and trap them in a solid-state lattice. Once the net is saturated, a controlled thermal cycle releases the captured vapors. They condense into a low-volume, high-efficiency burner fuel, valuable not for quantity, but for reliability. In a dead world, a tablespoon of predictable flame can sterilize tools, purify water, or ignite a thermal battery when everything else fails. But harvesting vapor is not merely about science. It is about battlefield perception. Vapor pockets accumulate where air movement is minimal, where temperature gradients stabilize, where rusted chambers form enclosed microclimates. Basements beneath fuel stations, shipping containers, elevator shafts, machinery housings, hollow forklift frames, derelict storage tanks whose liquid content evaporated decades ago, but whose vapors still cling to the interior walls. The untrained wander through these spaces unaware that they are walking through harvestable energy. The trained enter with discipline, slow steps, no sparks, no metal-on-metal friction, fully grounded, with the net unfurled like a silent trap. Extraction requires patience. You suspend the net in the vapor zone and wait. Minutes in light environments, hours in dense ones. You don't rush the process. The world has already done most of the work. You are simply collecting what time left behind. When the matrix reaches saturation, you seal the net in its thermal chamber, elevate the temperature with ruthless precision, and let the vapor reliquefy. Any lapse in discipline contaminates the batch. Any excess heat destabilizes the yield. Collapse doesn't forgive improvisation. The strength of the vapor harvest net is not in the volume of fuel it produces. It is in the doors it keeps open. When scavenging routes dry up and distillation supply chains fragment, the net ensures you still have access to ignition. It lets you light a burner in a frozen night. It lets you power a survival lamp inside a hostile ruin. It gives you the flame to sterilize wounds, harden tools, or signal through darkness without wasting precious reserves. Most survivors walk through the world believing they have nothing left to burn. The strategist knows the truth. The air itself still remembers fuel. And with the vapor harvest net, you can make that memory burn again. When the fossil remnants finally disappear, when every tank, drum, machine cavity, and vapor pocket has been stripped, distilled, reclaimed, or harvested, most survivors hit what they believe is the terminal wall of energy. They think the world has gone dark for good. They think fuel is over. That belief is a mistake born from the old world mindset where energy came from reservoirs, not from discipline. The truth is harsher and far more liberating. The collapse did not eliminate fuel. It eliminated the systems that made fuel effortless. And in that vacuum, biomass becomes the final sovereign resource. The biofuel war press is the instrument that makes that sovereignty real. Biomass looks primitive to the untrained. Sticks, leaves, rot, algae, seeds, carrion remnants. But chemically, biomass holds lipids, alcohol precursors, fermentable sugars, lignin compounds, and combustible fibers capable of powering burners, lamps, improvised generators, and thermal forges. The problem is not availability. Biomass is everywhere. The problem is extraction. Collapse has stripped away infrastructure, leaving nothing but crude, hard, survival-grade processes behind. The war press was built for that environment. It is not elegant, not efficient, not forgiving. It is violent, mechanical, and uncompromising, designed to squeeze usable energy from a world that has stopped giving you anything voluntarily. The first frontier is lipid extraction. Plant seeds and animal remnants carry tiny reservoirs of oils that ignite cleanly when processed. But without industrial centrifuges or chemical solvents, collapse survivors must rely on brute force mechanical pressure. The war press applies crushing force through a reinforced ram plate, collapsing cell walls and expelling raw oils into collection troughs. This oil is thick, unstable, and full of microscopic debris, but it burns. And unlike gasoline or diesel, biomass oil renews itself as long as life still clings to the wasteland. Survivors who learn this never run out of fire. The second frontier is fermentation. Collapse survivors who ignore fermentation throw away enormous fuel potential. Plant sugars, wild grains, fruit remnants, and even certain root tissues can be converted into alcohol, one of the cleanest small-scale fuels available after the fall. But fermentation is not guesswork. It demands sterility, temperature control, oxygen discipline, and microbial balance. The WarPress incorporates sealed fermentation canisters that protect your mash from collapse-era rot, insect contamination, and mold bloom. Over days or weeks, sugars convert into alcohol-rich liquid ready for distillation. This process doesn't just provide fuel, it provides morale, medical antiseptic, barter leverage, and ignition stability. 4 pillars of long-term survival. The third frontier is lignin conversion. Wood is abundant but inefficient when burned raw. Lignin, however, becomes potent when compressed under extreme pressure. The WarPress shapes biomass into high-density fuel bricks, uniform, stable, and slow-burning. These bricks outperform scavenged firewood, create predictable heat curves, and offer long-duration burn cycles essential for night watch posts, defensive perimeters, and slow-cook purification systems. They also store indefinitely, immune to moisture when properly sealed. In the late collapse world, such reliability isn't just convenience, it's strategic endurance. But the WarPress's real power lies in constraint alignment. Biomass conversion is slow. It's dirty. It demands labor, patience, and an understanding that you are no longer operating in a world where energy comes in gallons. It comes in increments, drops of oil, cups of alcohol, bricks of lignin. The amateurs reject this reality, dreaming of old-world abundance. The strategist accepts it and adapts. When you run the WarPress, you are no longer a scavenger. You have crossed the threshold into production. In a dead world, production is dominance. The final operational truth: biomass is infinite only if managed. Over-harvest your surroundings and you create a dead zone. Ignore seasonal cycles and your fuel dies with the environment. Fail to rotate forage areas and you deplete your only renewable resource. The WarPress is not a tool you use mindlessly. It is a tool that forces you to think in years, not hours. And that is why the biofuel WarPress matters. It is the first tool that frees you from the corpse of the old world and anchors you into the mechanics of the new one. Fossil fuels belong to the past. Biomass belongs to the survivor. Survivors think the final step of fuel recovery is ignition. They believe that once fuel is in their hands, siphoned, pumped, reclaimed, distilled, or pressed, the battle is over. That belief is the most catastrophic, confident mistake in the post-collapse world. Fuel doesn't just power machines, it also destroys them. It eats seals, warps pistons, corrodes injectors, shreds gaskets, destabilizes carburetors, fractures burner nozzles, and detonates combustion chambers from within. The apocalypse is littered with the relics of survivors who finally found fuel, only to kill their only generator, immolate their heating rig, or cripple their mobility platform with a single flawed decision. This is why the combustion compatibility analyzer is not the last tool on the list. It is the one that decides whether the rest even mattered. Every fuel in the collapse is chemically compromised. Gasoline loses octane until it behaves like a volatile solvent. Diesel absorbs water until it becomes a microbial swamp. Bio-oils polymerize into resin. Distillate fuels mutate with temperature swings. Even alcohol blends vary wildly depending on source material and fermentation integrity. You cannot guess. You cannot trust your eye. You cannot rely on smell, color, flame shape, or folk knowledge. Collapse conditions turn intuition into a death sentence. Only analysis prevents mechanical suicide. The analyzer works on 3 fronts. The first is volatility profiling. It samples the fuel and measures its ignition response, how fast it vaporizes, how aggressively it combusts, how much pressure it produces per stroke. Low volatility causes misfires, soot buildup, and engine stall. High volatility causes backfires, piston slap, and catastrophic detonation. In the collapse, detonation does not simply ruin your engine. It can tear open fuel lines, rupture tanks, and ignite everything around you. The analyzer tells you whether the fuel burns or explodes. The second front is contamination detection. Water hides at the molecular level. Microbial bloom masquerades as harmless cloudiness. Metallic particulates settle until vibration wakes them. Chemical breakdown products mimic fuel visually but behave like acids under heat. The analyzer exposes all of it. Through thermal scanning, refractive testing, and particulate isolation, it reveals what your eyes never could. It tells you whether your batch will burn clean, burn dirty, or refuse to burn at all. And in a world with no spare parts, that distinction is survival. The third front is system compatibility. Fuel is not universal. Engines, burners, stoves, lamps, and improvised rigs each depend on different combustion curves. Some demand slow burn. Some require vapor phase ignition. Some rely on pressure stability. Some operate with narrow tolerances. The analyzer cross-references the fuel profile with the requirements of your device. It tells you whether your generator will run smoothly for 6 hours, choke in 20 minutes, or explode on startup. It tells you whether your heater will warm your shelter or set it ablaze. It tells you whether your survival plan continues or collapses. But the analyzer's greatest value is philosophical. It enforces discipline. It eliminates gambling. It removes ego. The collapse punishes guessers. The analyzer erases guessing entirely. It converts uncertainty into operational clarity, into data, into decisions, into survival. The amateurs treat every fuel as usable until proven otherwise. The strategist treats every fuel as lethal until proven safe. The analyzer is the instrument that makes that mindset possible. When the world gives you unstable energy, this tool decides whether that energy becomes power or becomes your cremation pyre. With this final tool, the system is complete. Extraction, transfer, reclamation, conversion, harvesting, production, and now verification. Fuel becomes an asset again, not a threat. And in a world built on ruins, that is the closest thing to control you will ever hold.